Hi, my name is Jay Patel. I am a student at UC Berkeley studying under Professor Lavian in IEOR 190G. In this course, we started out by taking an individual company and looking at its place in the smartphone patent war. But now we have switched gears. We have one patent that we choose a piece, and we deconstruct and construct arguments relevant to it and relating it back to the basic concepts of patents. This week, our goal is to prove that our patent is obvious and by consequence, therefore should not have been awarded a patent. So I'm going to get right into my patent. Now, my patent is at the center of a lawsuit against Apple, where Apple's defendant. HTC created or had filed a patent and got the license for a patent which claims to have a unique method to manage the power of a smartphone. After looking through some of the prior art, I've come to the conclusion that they were not the first ones to do it, that their additions were obvious, and that therefore the defendant has a strong case against HTC. Now, I'm going to start off by talking about what the HTC patent says, and I'll go back to the one that predates it. Now, the HTC patent has comprises a method to reset a smartphone. It searches for network service. It operates mobile phone system in standby when the PDA portion of the smartphone is being used. It will put the phone part of the smartphone in standby when the PDA version of the PDA part of the phone is used, and it also um, puts the phone to sleep for puts the phone to sleep as well as has a power detection method such that the threshold if the amount of power in the battery decreases at a certain point, the phone will shut itself off or shut off certain features. So that is what the HTC patent says. In a nutshell, it separates the PDA and the phone part of a smartphone to conserve battery life. It shuts off, depending on how it's being used, it shuts off the opposite function to save battery life, and it will detect the amount of power in the battery and will accordingly shut off the phone or shut off features of the phone to keep it energy efficient. So that's in a nutshell what the HTC patent says. Now, there's a patent that predates it. It's a patent filed by Qualcomm, patent U.S. patent number 6725060. Um, it uh, it um, excuse me. It does essentially the exact same thing. What it does is it splits up the two different parts of the phone, the smartphone, the PDA portion, and what it says is when one part of the phone is used, it shuts off the other part. In this case, it discusses more along the lines of like, um, there's actually a prompt that comes onto the screen and tells you that it happens, but it does the same exact method internally. Um, in addition to that, it has different thresholds, keyword used in the HTC patent, which might actually limit its case against Apple if Apple doesn't use those thresholds. It uses similar thresholds as the HTC patent, but the only major difference between the HTC patent and the Qualcomm patent is that the Qualcomm patent relies on timers to shut off certain features of the phone. So as a user, you set up a certain number of time, like 15 minutes, for instance, and it'll shut off that part of the phone if it's idle. Whereas the HTC patent claims that once it detects a certain level of power that's in the battery that's been reduced, then it'll shut off parts of the phone. Now, my argument is that someone, an ordinary individual who's skilled in the art, would be able to come up with this idea, and therefore it is obvious. So I think from a common sense standpoint, it makes sense that the most logical step after timers would be to consequently see if one can detect the amount of power in a battery and shut off features of the phone. So inherently, I would argue that HTC's patent relies, 90% on the Qualcomm patent, and then the additional 10% that it doesn't rely on the Qualcomm patent. The small segment where it talks about how it has a power detection method that will detect the amount of power, and that it'll have different thresholds that will turn off certain features. That is akin to the timer, just the next logical step. And because it is a next logical step, and that even because someone like even myself, not trained in the electrical engineering discipline, even if I could come up with an idea like this, it strikes me as being obvious. So therefore, HTC's patent is obvious. I thank you for listening, and I hope you have a fantastic spring break.